It's a long time. My name is Heidi Budai, and I'm Assistant Executive Director of the JCC of Metro Detroit. It is my pleasure to welcome you this Thursday evening to hear a conversation with Michael Ian Black, author of Better Man, a mostly serious letter to my son, and Meredith Jacobs, author of Just Between Us, Mothers and Sons. The goal of Detroit Jewish Book Fair is to bring the best new Jewish books and authors from around the world to Metro Detroit. This year, the rooms we're all sitting in may be different, but that purpose remains the same. The book fair runs until December 9th, and we have an exceptional lineup of events planned. To see our full event schedule, learn about ways to support Book Fair, watch events you may have missed, and find our online store where you can find A Better Man and Just Between Us, and plenty of other hand-selected books and gifts, visit our website at culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. This year, in order to provide as much programming to the community as possible, we've made all of our events free of charge. So if you enjoy this event and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to Book Fair. You can do either or both at our website, culturalarts.jcc.org/bookfair. We rely on community support to make this event possible, so thank you in advance for becoming part of the Book Fair family. The Book Fair team would like to thank co-sponsor JCC's Nerim Professional Development for Congregational School Educators for their support. We have a really special event for you this evening, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below or by texting the number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they will take as many of your questions as possible. While you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way, you'll never miss any of our exciting events. I also want to extend our deepest gratitude to the whole Book Fair committee. This has been a challenging year, of course, and your dedication, commitment, and hard work have made this exciting festival possible. The focus of tonight's event are the books A Better Man, a mostly serious letter to my son, and Just Between Us, Mothers and Sons. We have with us the authors of these books, Michael Ian Black and Meredith Jacobs, as well as Mickey Frank, who will moderate this discussion. A Better Man, a mostly serious letter to my son, is Michael Ian Black's thoughtful, inspiring, and deeply personal book. It navigates the complex gender issues of our times. In sharing the letter he wrote to his teenage son before he leaves for college, the comedian delivers a poignant answer to the most urgent question: how can we be and raise better men? Meredith Jacobs' book, Just Between Us, Mothers and Sons, is a thoughtful keepsake journal by a woman's advocate and her son, Jules. It is the perfect place for her and son to share stories and dreams, hopes and fears, from friendships in school to positive masculinity. Michael Ian Black is an actor, comedian, writer, director, and has created and starred in many TV shows and iconic films. He is the author of several award-winning books for children and adults. As a stand-up comedian, he regularly tours the country and has released many comedy albums and podcasts. Michael currently lives in Connecticut. Meredith Jacobs is the CEO of JWI, a nonprofit with the mission of empowering women leaders and ending violence against women and girls. She is an award-winning journalist and former editor-in-chief of Washington Jewish Week. She's the co-author of with her daughter Sophie, of Just Between Us, a best-selling series of interactive journals. This is her first book with her son, Jules. Mickey Frank is the director of J Family at the Detroit JCC. Please join me in welcoming Michael Ian Black, Meredith Jacobs, and Mickey Frank.
Thank you, Heidi. Hello, everyone. How are you?
Hi, good.
I'm so happy to be here with you both this evening to learn about these incredible books, journal that you wrote. I would love to just begin. Heidi gave a lot of information on the background of each in her introduction, But I'd love to sort of jump right in. For those of you watching us at home through YouTube, as Heidi said, we will be looking for your comments, and we will get to as many as possible. But as I said, let's jump in, and I'd love to hear from both of you. Just begin with what inspired you to write your books. I'm a mother and of 2 daughters and a son, and I have to say, you know, after reading both or experiencing them both, because one is a journal, I feel like I need to just keep reading these throughout their childhood. I really just, you know, I really need to study them. So really excited to hear from you both. So Michael, do you want to start and sort of tell us what inspired you?
Sure. As Heidi said in the introduction, I have a son. At the time I started writing this, he was a senior in high school and about to go to college. And I had been paying a lot of attention to the issue of gun violence because our town is right next door to Sandy Hook. And so throughout my children's childhoods, we have been paying special attention to that subject. When the Parkland shooting happened in Florida, I guess about 2 years ago now, my son was a senior, and I was thinking about him, and I was thinking about gun violence, and I was wondering why it's always boys who pull the triggers in these events. Why is it boys who commit so much violence? And what is going on with boys and men in general in this culture? And I sort of felt like I had an opportunity and maybe an obligation to have this conversation with my own son. And that formed the germ of this book.
Great. And I'm going to revisit that with you because I literally, as I was reading the book, I was reading it digitally, and I kept just taking pictures of every page and circling, like, oh, I like that quote. And then literally every page was sort of like that. So I have some quotes from the book, if you don't mind. I'd love to sort of revisit them, especially around male violence, and sort of hear more what you said. But first, I just want to welcome Meredith too, and just, you know, I'm so interested. You know, I know Heidi mentioned you've created a journal with your daughter, but now with your son Jules, and so. Just so interested to hear where, you know, what inspired you and you know, why you wrote this.
Absolutely. And when we get back to what Michael was talking about, we should talk about how much of that gun violence is also has roots in gender-based violence, and how many of those mass shootings are really there's a partner, there's probably a woman who's a target who's in that group, including Parkland. But with the journals, you know, when I was telling Heidi, I recognized her from when I came to your JCC back in 2007 when I was touring for my book about Shabbat. And around the time my daughter Sophie was 9. And I remember sitting in my office, you know, working, and she came into the door and she said, "Mom, if I write to you in a journal, will you write back to me?" And it was something that we had started when she was really a very little girl. I had this little book with a bee on it, and it said, "Be happy." And so when she, as part of the nighttime routine, when I would tuck her in, I would say, "Sophie, what made you happy today?" Because I wanted her to kind of go to sleep thinking of something happy and positive. And we would write down what made Sophie happy. And then I would write down what made mommy happy. And it was usually, you know, Sophie was happy because she got to play with dolls, and mommy was happy because Sophie took a long nap, you know, something like that. And it's funny when you were saying about keeping the journal and going back over the years to see what the kids wrote. Sophie recently, she's got this box filled with the journals, and she found the happy book, which of course she didn't remember. And she's like, "Mom, this is amazing." Like, she was kind of learning about who she was when she was a very little girl. So when I was touring for the Shabbat book, I must have somehow talked about how Sophie and I were keeping this journal together. And then it started because she wanted to tell me about this little boy she had a crush on and was kind of embarrassed to talk about. And I noticed all the women in the audience kind of, you know, like pulled out a pencil and said, like, "Go buy journal." And I was talking to my literary agent, and she said, oh, well, we should publish the journal. And I was like, there's nothing compelling about our journal. And we said, well, what if we created something that other mothers and daughters could use? That was kind of based on what Sophie and I talked about. And my son Jules is just 2 years younger, and of course he wanted to start journaling too, and he's like a really sweet kid. And I would notice the way he journaled, it was a little different. You know, he didn't have the fine motor skills, he didn't want to write a lot, so he would draw pictures, or it was just interesting the way it kind of shaped out. So after the journal with Sophie was published and it did well, I said to the publisher, let's do a mother-son. And they said, no. Boys will never do it. Boys won't do it.
Oh,
and I said, I get emails every week from parents saying, please, I have a son, do this. And I was like, I know, you know, all those things you don't think about what boys are really like until you have one. I'm like, no, boys will do this. It wasn't until Me Too really kind of exploded that they called me and said, how quickly can we get this on the market? And so Jules and I, and it was, you know, around the same time I was seeing on Twitter, Michael writing about, you know, you were tweeting a lot at the time about, positive masculine or healthy masculinity and just about kind of what you were thinking about. I remember following it, and I was thrilled when you announced that a book was coming out. And that was the time I just wish the publishers had known this was something they should have been talking about a little earlier.
Yeah. Well, you know, I have to say what resonated with me around sort of, you know, the fact that you had one with your daughter and now your son and the publisher's response, I feel that very much where, you know, as a mother of 2 girls and then a son, you know, the way we communicate and connect does feel different, but equally important. And having this tool really feels meaningful. So I'm excited to use it with my own son. And I think one of the secrets, and we can get into it later, is the fact that you sort of hide it in a way, right? Or like put it in a special place. And I love that. And I just love the idea of ending every day with gratitude, no matter what, you know? So I think that's amazing. So maybe we'll get more into the details about the journal in a bit, because I do want to talk about some of the rules you set out for it, because I just think it's really, really brilliant. But I do want to go back to the concept of male violence, because I know that this is something that you both either, you know, you obviously, Meredith, work in the field to help in this area. And so I just want to give a little bit, is it okay if I read a little quote from each? Are you both comfortable with that? And okay.
But you have to use a funny accent for mine. It can be.
What'd you say?
You have to use a funny accent for mine.
Uh-oh. You know, if I tried, my kids would never talk to me again. But so maybe I'll just use my own voice. Okay, so from A Better Man, we have male violence, whether justified or not, is most often rooted in fear. Think of the types of fear as a pyramid. At the base is the fear of loss of life, your own life, or the lives of those under your care. Above that is the fear of scarcity, which is the fear that somebody is going to take your limited amount of stuff, thereby endangering your life or the lives of those under your care. I think most hate-based violence lives in this broad area. At the top of the pyramid are 2 brother fears: the fear of diminishment in other people's eyes, which is the fear we call pride, and the fear of letting others down, which is the fear we call honor. Activating any of these fears may move a man to violence. Okay, so I love that so much. And you went into a lot of detail about pride and honor. And I think it is really, really profound and really spoke to me. I want to read what Meredith wrote in her introduction and then sort of let you both respond. So in Just Between Us, you wrote, Meredith, Jules wrote
Oh,
this.
that was Jules. Yeah, a lot of the quotes you pulled were his. Yeah.
I have some Jules and some you. So this is from Jules, your son, who said, I created an opportunity for 80 young men, including college students, to lobby Congress and the White House in finding ways to fight against sexual assault in high schools and colleges. And then you wrote about the nonprofit. It's called JWI, is that correct?
It's Jewish Women International, yes.
Jewish Women International. So maybe if you both could if you could touch on Jewish Women International and, you know, Michael, if you could just give us maybe expound upon that concept of male violence and this idea of pride and honor. That would be wonderful. Meredith, do you want to begin?
Yeah. So JWI was originally B'nai B'rith Women.
Okay.
Yeah. So, in the 80s, left B'nai B'rith, same time as ADL, BBYO, all of them changed the names. Around that time, one of the members was shot and killed by her husband. And the mission then pivoted to become ending violence against women and girls in a very positive and holistic way. Looking at violence against women is really being about power. It's how do we give women power to control their lives and to create lives in which they thrive. So we teach healthy relationships to fraternity and sorority students. We bring in men as allies. We understand that 99% of domestic violence survivors are victims of financial abuse. So we teach financial literacy and we empower women to be leaders. So actually, that was how Jules got involved, because during the Obama administration, they created It's On Us, which was a way to really engage men in a positive way to step up as allies and active bystanders on college campuses to end sexual assault on college campus. And Jules would hear me talk about it, and he was old enough. He was, middle school, early high school. And he was on the lacrosse team, and he heard some of the guys say some things, he saw parties where things were happening. And he said, Mom, it's too late to wait until we're in college to start talking to us about it. What can we do? And he was very active in BBYO and ZBT, Zeta Beta Tau, we are their philanthropic partners. So we do a lot of work through that fraternity. So Jules created an event with the BBYO chapters in our area, and the ZBT chapters, where the high school men and the college men went to the White House and actually spoke to the It's On Us staff. We then had a lobby day where they spoke to congressmen on both sides of the aisle and talked about the need to create something in high school. And then he went on to become the high school lead for It's On Us and used his platform as a lacrosse captain to create an event for other high school athletes to talk about consent.
That's incredible. That's incredible. You can really feel that through his words, and just what an incredible, really, it's amazing. And that's why I want my son to be like, read that, it was amazing. And then Michael, how about you? Can you sort of give us a little more from the quote I read and sort of, your take on male violence and what's behind it?
Yeah. I just want to clarify very quickly that you started the quote by saying, I think the quote you started with what violence, whether justified or not. And starting there makes it sound like maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm sorry. It was out of point.
You're not saying violence is ever justified, right?
Yes. Thank you for clarifying. Yes.
I think I was talking about, there are moments, extreme moments, where it's self-defense or something, where there may be a need for violence, but in general, I think violence is almost never justified. Root of violence, as I said, and incidentally, Meredith, I'm sure I know you're far more educated on this subject than I am. That sort of pyramid that I described was my own creation and understanding. It's not based in anything. So if you feel like I'm getting something wrong there, Meredith, please, by all means, step in and be like, Michael, that was stupid. And I'll be like, yeah, that probably was stupid.
Your book was so well researched and so well. It was.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But I do think so much violence, male violence. Most violence is male violence. The vast majority of violence is male violence. But I think most violence is rooted primarily in terror. It is in this fear. Almost all violence, I think, feels like self-defense in some respect. So we justify it to ourselves because we fear that something is being lost, something as elemental as our lives, something as kind of amorphous as our honor. And I think so much of masculinity is rooted in terror. And what my book is about a lot about is trying to sort of figure out where that fear comes from, trying to understand it so that we can kind of exorcise ourselves as guys from it. Because it will make us just better humans,
Right.
and it'll make us happier. And I think if we can sort of get to the foundational stuff a little bit, I think in time, violence will decrease.
Yeah, I really felt that by reading your book. I felt like you were building sort of this pyramid, this visual of awareness. Like, how can we be aware of really what's going on? Like you just said, so that, awareness really very often is the first step to any sort of healing, right? So I think that's really, really great. I want to take a comment. We have one of our, someone in the ether of YouTube is asking us, the question is, what about COVID and its effects on social norms of students everywhere? School shootings are more likely when there is an inability to connect to others. Any thoughts on that? Do either of you have any specific thoughts on that?
Well, it was interesting for the first time school shootings are down, and it's just because the kids aren't in school.
They're not in school.
It's a terrible reason for it not. It'll be interesting to see what COVID and this isolation does for the kids. I'm sure some kids, like anything, will be resilient and will adapt. I don't know. It would be very hard. I feel very lucky that my kids are young adults. I feel for parents now, not only having to juggle work and childcare and homeschooling, but also the effect of not being able to have normal social interactions with other kids. It's going to be rough. And that's why they should journal and talk about it.
Yeah, right. And Michael, so another viewer asked a different question, which I thought maybe we could start with you on, which is, who are some of your role models for positive and healthy masculinity?
There are many. And one of the challenges, I think, when we talk about positive and healthy masculinity is to think about everybody, men and women, as first and foremost humans and therefore flawed. Like when we talk about, when I get asked this question, I think a lot of times the idea is like, who's a guy who's kind of like got it all together? And in truth, I've met a lot of people in my life. I don't think I've ever met anybody who I would say has it all together, including myself. But I mean, especially myself. So I think there's plenty of great men out there and plenty of great women out there. The person who always springs to mind first and foremost when I think about this question, just because he's so public facing, is Barack Obama, as you said, Meredith, as you were mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet you if I knew him personally, I'd be like, yeah, Barack's cool, but like Barack has his own issues. You know what I mean? Like everybody has their stuff, but we can take from different people. We can admire people in our lives and people in the public sphere. And if we find that there's things about them that maybe don't live up to our ideals, okay. None of us are ever going to live up to the platonic ideal of anything. But in terms of just like being somebody who is both strong and also is able to show vulnerability, somebody who's able to show empathy, but is also independent and clear thinking, somebody who, shows a lot of love for his family and for other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think Obama is as good a role model as there's going to be.
That's what I was gonna, when you were asking that, Obama came to my mind also, and it's not because he was elected president or because it's what makes him real. It's the way he talks about Michelle and his girls, the way the kind of father he is, it's those things. I think so much our kids, it's not what we say, it's what we do. They're watching us and they're learning. And I'm so grateful for the kind of man my husband is and the role model he set with just the way we interact and the way he is, that both my daughter and my son have seen, that he's the example to Jules for how you respect, your partner, how you lift her. My husband every night at dinner says, thank you for making dinner. And I'm like, of course, like I have to make dinner. You guys are going to starve, but it's that. And, those are the things that are, it's the regular people in your life who are the role models. You don't have to look to famous people.
I haven't read it yet.
Surround yourself with good people.
I have it. I haven't read it yet. But apparently like Obama's like pretty self-critical in his own autobiography. I'm curious to read what he talks about his own ambition and wondering if, how much of that was a negative in his life and in Michelle's life and in the girl's life. And I think that's a really common problem among men. We feel so catalyzed to be ambitious, to show that we're useful, to show our utility to people. And a lot of times that ambition ends up outstripping the stuff that we're ostensibly doing it for. We're ostensibly doing this stuff for our family and for our loved ones. And then a lot of times it ends up taking over. Like we have a lot of problems. And I think frank conversation about them is really helpful.
Yeah, it makes me think about, for both of your books, sort of the idea of happiness and winning is what this conversation is making me think about. And if you allow me to go a little bit back into the book again, and I'll try not to say anything totally out of context again, but I love what you wrote here. So in A Better Man, it says, instead of what do you want to be when you grow up, what do you think will make you happy when you grow up? And I love that because I feel like, at least my 16-year-old, she's so overwhelmed by that question. It's so overwhelming and daunting. She has no idea. And of course, even if she thought she had an idea, of course, that won't be what she probably will be, right? So it's a dead end type of question. It really leads to bad places, I feel like. And this is so much more open and thought provoking. And then you also say, happiness is a quality people rarely discuss when talking about what it means to be a man. So I thought that was interesting. And Meredith, I have to read what Jules wrote again, because I love it again. He said, for years, my mom told me I would love the person I'd grow up to be, that the traits I thought isolated me were the traits that would shape me into the man I am today. I believe that because of my relationship with my mom, I learned to be confident in my decisions. I gained the ability to talk about topics that aren't always popular, but are important, and began to not only trust in others, but in myself as well. And then he really challenges readers he said, here's the challenge for you. Break the mold, defy expectations, be the hero that your Gotham or Metropolis needs. Boys are a lot more than what some people make us out to be. We're also a lot more than the stars of Sunday Night Football. We can be heroes. If we educate ourselves to be better men, more understanding men, we can begin to change the paradigm and alter the culture for generations to come. So he's my hero, I think. So I just love that so much. But, it makes me think about your, Meredith, you wrote this with Jules, and, but I'm interested to hear about, Michael, your son's reaction to this letter. What does he think of that? And, what was his reaction? I'm curious.
Well,
did he take all the advice?
No.
Right.
I wrote this, this has been in the works for, I don't know, a year and a half or so. So it was pretty much done by the time COVID started. So the publication date I had the books months before they came out. The publication date got moved. So consequently, I gave it to him. I mean, he had the opportunity to read it before it was published. He declined. It was on his night table for months before it came out. He declined to read it then. And then finally, I think once it was actually out in the world, he cracked it open and started reading it. And his reaction wasn't what I expected. He was resistant to it, not because of anything that I think is in it necessarily, but because to him, it felt like I wasn't being dad in the way that he knows me to be, because it's written, you know what I mean? And so the voice in it isn't the voice that he hears every day. He felt like it was being filtered, which of course it is. I mean, it's a book, like I don't talk to him the way I'm talking to you. I mean, the book isn't the way I'm talking to you right now. I also think, although he won't admit this, that part of his resistance was the fact that it is so kind of bare and vulnerable. And I think it's probably hard for a 19-year-old to read something from his dad being that frank about sex and gender issues and race in the country and like my own flaws and mistakes. I think it's the kind of thing that he will absorb in time and presumably really treasure when I'm dead, and probably not before.
Or when he has a son and he'll be like, oh yeah, that was right. Now I get it. Like we all did.
Right. And Meredith, was Jules happy to sort of have his turn? I know you said you wrote your first journal with your daughter. Was he like, okay, it's my turn? Or what was his, process through this?
Yeah. And I was a parenting columnist for years. So my kids were used to, and I had like a radio show where I would talk, and I was always talking about the kids. So they just kind of grew up with, and once they were old enough to have friends who either, could learn about what I was saying, I very carefully edited myself to not share anything they wouldn't want to share. So, but there was definitely excitement that he had about finally getting to write, to write this. He can be very passionate, as you can tell from the way he's writing. And I would have to, when we were working on it, and I did the same thing with Sophie, where they really led in what the prompts would be, because if it wasn't something that the kids would want to write about, they weren't going to do it. It couldn't be me, like as a mom writing, here's what we're going to talk about. It had to really come from them. And I would have to remind him, like, Jules, this is for like much younger boys. Like, we're not, like, pull back a little. I know you're, 20 or however old he was when we started working on it. But I also know with both Sophie and Jules, if I would say, oh, we should have an event, like with Sophie, we should have an event at the middle school and do a book signing. She was like horrified that her friend, it took like years. Her friends would find out, like in college, they were like, Sophie wrote a book. Like, why didn't you tell us about it? And the same, like, God forbid, like his fraternity would have found out that he did this. So he's all for speaking up and being that guy in the room, but like, ixnay on the ukbay, whatever. So
that's great. Well, there's a lot of people commenting, so I want to get to a few comments. They're really great. Dr. Katzman asks, are you aware of a relationship between authoritarian or abusive parenting and the later perpetuation of violence?
Yeah, that's the
is that
cycle
sort of
of violence that you've got to break. But yeah, that's why it's so important. And I feel so fortunate that my children have grown up in a healthy home.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do at JWI is we build children's libraries in domestic violence shelters. And we make a point of stocking the libraries with books with positive male role models, because for many of the children, especially the boys, they don't have that in their lives. And, you can't be what you can't see. So yes, what Dr. Katzman talks about, unfortunately, is it's that cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. You can't be what you can't see. And I think that that's so true. Okay, I'm going to go to another one. I had a thought, but it left. So we're going to go to another one, which is, as a former high school college guidance counselor, I worked with so many boys who were just not given an opportunity to be their best in the conventional academic environment. Does that sentiment resonate with you? In either maybe your children's lives or just what you're seeing professionally, that sort of this academic environment is hurting the cause more than helping it? Or Michael, do you have a sense for this one? Or
I do. I spent a lot of time. Well, there's a couple things I would say about it. The first is the educational system in this country, and I suspect in most Western countries, but I've only done any research into this one, was designed essentially in the tail end of the Industrial Revolution to make children ready to be factory workers. Everything in our educational system is kind of inherited by that system. And we know that we sort of sense, I think a lot of parents and people who have gone through that system, that there's so much of it that feels anachronistic, that doesn't feel like it's serving us particularly well. A lot of boys in particular, I think girls have this problem too, but this happens a lot with boys, particularly in early grades, have a hard time literally sitting still and literally just not exuding the kind of energy that so many boys have. You talk about, there's a kind of rambunctiousness that a lot of girls have it too, but it's more, it appears more commonly in boys, that they have, that cannot be expressed in that setting. And I think it sets a lot of boys back. There's also, I think, the grade pressure and grade inflation that affects both genders pretty badly, I think. And a lot of that, I think, is directly tied to the way that we think about success in the culture, that we really measure success as a competitive sport. We think about success as I'm better than, and so we get into GPAs and we get into SAT scores, and so they become reflections of competitiveness as opposed to reflections of self and understanding. And that ties back to that question that you mentioned, Mickey, and then Meredith, you were talking about with your daughter, which is, Meredith, and I think it's beautiful. What made you happy today? It's a really good question. And Mickey, when you referenced, my thing in my book about, what do you think will make you happy when you grow up? Like, the idea of happiness doesn't really resonate in the school system at all. There's very little in education that is geared towards happiness. At best, maybe, there's like art programs that are perpetually on the chopping block, or music programs that are perpetually on the chopping block, or theater programs, or some sports. And we're willing to sacrifice, it seems like, sort of what we think of as short-term happiness for the long-term idea of success. But our long-term idea of success, I fear, is so skewed that we end up training our kids to just continually delay happiness throughout their lives. You think about people like saying, fantasizing about when they retire, they're going to finally do that thing that makes them happy. Well, it shouldn't take you 65 years to figure that out, or to find out a way to be happy. And I think so much of it starts in the school system.
Or to think happiness is some big, huge thing and feeling, and not something little can make you happy. Those little things that somehow you'll be happy when, you're the next president of the United States or whatever, that it has to be big, that it has to be perfect, that it has to be, the big fairy tale and not something simple. I think it's hard to be a boy. I think it's hard in school. I think it's hard to be the nice kid and the sweet kid. I think the social pressures on boys still reward those kids who are assholes,
Yeah.
and that's hard. I watched Joel struggle with that, of being the nice kid, but the one who also played lacrosse, but the one who also loved BBYO, and the one who, that's hard. And I heard him, he would tell me stories when the guys would say things and he would speak up and say, that's not okay to say. And they would call him a snowflake or a tryhard or and how many guys, this is one of the things we talk to the fraternity men about, is when someone makes a joke, a sexist joke, a racist joke, and all the guys laugh, and most of the guys in that room are really uncomfortable and really think it's wrong, but they assume they're the only ones who feel that way. And God forbid they say something and speak out and are then isolated. And what we say is it's one or two. And that's why what's happening on college campuses with sexual assault, it's not the majority of guys. The majority of guys are great and are wonderful young men. But that bro culture, that toxic bro culture, allows those one or two to get away with really, really awful, violent, terrible things.
And also to dominate the culture, because there is that bro culture reinforces so much of what I think a lot of guys believe to be true about men, even if they don't feel like it's true for themselves. So they think like boys have to be super sexually aggressive, or boys have to like always be willing to step up for a fight, or boys have to, dominate conversations, or whatever it is. And they see their contemporaries, it might be a small number of them, doing that and maybe getting rewarded for that behavior, or at least not punished for that behavior. And so that reinforces their ideas, those old ideas. And I think a lot of times it makes them feel inadequate, and it makes them feel like they just need to keep their mouths shut. Because like you said, Meredith, they think they're the only ones who are experiencing this, and they're not.
Yeah. And it this reminds me of another sort of thread I saw in both of your books about, this concept of suffering in silence and how prevalent that is. I don't think I'll go to a quote yet, but Michael, you want to just sort of talk a little bit about what does that mean to you, and what does it look like, and what is the potential remedy for that?
So again, it's like foundational for men, because so much of masculinity is about projecting strength. It's about saying to the world, I am strong. I am therefore invincible. I can move into this world in a confident way. I can win. I can succeed. And you're not going to damage me. Part of that, if you subscribe to that, part of that means that you can't afford to show weakness. You can't afford to show your vulnerability and that you're suffering, because if you do, that is belying everything that you've been taught to project about yourself. It's belying this idea of invincibility and ultimate strength. We see it in our political leaders, people who are afraid to admit error, or say that they made a mistake, or to question beliefs that maybe they once professed and now aren't so sure about. We see it everywhere. And we also see sometimes the rabid reaction when somebody does admit error, or express confusion, or express vulnerability. So the idea of suffering in silence for guys is so deep, because to question that means, for a lot of guys, to question the entirety of what it means to be a man.
I mean, just think, and I think, Michael, you wrote about this also, just even the phrase man up, and what does that mean? It means shut up, stop crying, do what you got to do. And when you look at, talk about role models, when you've got some, without naming certain someone who can't admit losing. And
I have no idea who you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And what is, we talk so much about winning. Why don't we teach our children, what they learn from losing and how that helps them become better, and how to be self-aware and how to be humble. And I think there's an excellent book by Rosalind Wiseman, who wrote Queen Bees and Wannabes. She wrote a book about boys called Kingpins and Wingmen. And she said something that really resonated. And she said, don't assume because boys don't talk a lot that they don't have very complex social lives and complex lives. Just because the girls are like, oh my God, and then Susie did this, and that our boys aren't struggling with the same things, but we don't give them the space to talk. We do this for our girls. We do this for our daughters. We're encouraging them to have a voice and be strong. We're not encouraging our boys to have a positive voice, and to give them space to be heard and to encourage and to let them know that what they say is important and valuable. And I think about the advice my mom gave me when my kids were little. And she said, the best time to get your kids to talk is when you're driving a car or when you're tucking them in at night. And I think it's because they're not looking you in the eye. When you're in the car and they're in the back seat when they're little, they don't have to look at you. When you're tucking them in at night when they're little, the room is dark and it's cozy. And again, you're not, you're snuggling with them. You're not looking at them. And I think it's easier to just say what you feel. It's private, but it's safe to talk like that. And that's the way I think about the journal too. It's a way the kids, were able to communicate with me that was a little easier if it was something that was hard for them to talk about.
Yeah, that's actually what I would say I just appreciate so much about the journals. I really feel like it speaks so much to this idea that, bringing you out of the silence, giving you sort of a safe space to do so. And I think I was saying even before we started today, maybe a little off camera, but, with my girls, I felt it was so much easier, right, to have some of these, conversations. How was your day? And they just automatically told me every detail, sometimes too many details about their day. But my son, it was good. And I'm like, what is good? And I tried to go on Pinterest and look up 10 questions to ask your son to get more information. And, always came up dry. So, but that's.
And did you ever ask the wrong question where you said something that you thought was so innocent? And then they're like, fine. And then storm out of the room. Shoot. What did I say? I thought I was being nice.
That is every day with my daughter in my house.
Oh, it's just, yes.
Right, and you're like, can I take it back? Wait, let me start again.
Right. Wait, that was just Pinterest, not me. Yes. And so I think, can you just walk us through, Meredith, for just a moment, sort of how the technicalities of the journal, how does it look? Sort of, you and Jewel sort of set up some rules, which I like. And, how does it function? How does it work?
Well, it's funny because if you look at it, the rules are for the mom. It's
true.
very intentionally you can't tell all your friends about it. Guess what Jules wrote to me in my book? No, you can't. It's not homework. You don't correct their spelling afterwards and say well, listen, this is when you write this way. This is, you've got, and they can't get into trouble. You can't, it's got to be a space where they can, if you want them to be honest, you can't then, right. They can't get in trouble. It can't result in a lecture or they will never write to you again. I mean,
Today I tried heroin for the first time.
You're like, awesome. I remember when I tried heroin at your age. And that's the other thing. It's not, the journal isn't set up to give advice. It's set up so that you're each kind of talking about the same things. They're talking about friendships. They're talking about, their dreams. They're talking about, and you get to kind of share. And the hope is that they'll say, gosh, maybe mom or dad understands what I'm going through. And I also found that when I would write, and I would write back at night. Part of it is like, okay, you leave it on the night table, you decide. And that was because one time Sophie left her journal for me, and I didn't realize she had left it there. And she came in crying one day, like, you didn't write me back and you don't care. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know. It was like under a pile of stuff. But when I would write, it would be, late, I would be in bed, and I kind of felt like I was back to being a 12-year-old girl writing in my diary. And I felt like I could connect maybe with what they were going through. So there was something to that also.
Yeah.
And
I
it
love,
opens up the dialogue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love that it's not just the child journaling, which I feel like so often is the case. We're encouraging our kids, oh, journal, it's good for you, it's good, or whatever. This is the mother and the son, or in the case of your other journal, the mother and the daughter journaling. And what I see as a parent, what I'm excited to do is to share those stories I would never even think to tell him. I mean, because, just taking the time to stop and think, and, I'm really excited for that experience. So I want to, we don't have too much time left. So before we go, though, I do want to hit on the topic of love, because I really love what was said in both of your books about this. So Michael, you say the simple secret of manhood is love. Then you say choosing love necessarily means choosing to expose yourself to pain. The two go hand in hand. So to help men love, we have to give ourselves the tools to deal with our pain, which I keep repeating myself. That is great. Meredith, and you say, imagine you are able to share with your son early on what it means to be in a healthy, loving relationship. Learning about your son and being a part of his life is a wonderful adventure. The greatest gift my son has given me is our relationship. So just would love to hear both of your thoughts on sort of, on love and what that means, from the perspective of parent of a son and for your son.
One of the things I write in the book, and I think I believe this to be true, is the hardest words for a man to say aren't "I love you," they're "I need help." In a lot of ways, there's similar sentiments. When we choose to love, and I think love has to be a choice that we make, I think that's not entirely as hard for men as sometimes women may think. I think men actually do give their love kind of easily at times. What I think is harder for men, much harder, is to accept love from other people, because it means, again, a kind of raising of the portcullis, if that's the word, the door that's guarding ourselves. And it is exposing ourselves the same way that expressing our suffering exposes ourselves. They're all kind of manifestations of vulnerability. And so when we say, when we accept somebody else's love, in a sense, we're also saying to that person, I need help. That help that we're asking for is their love. It's a hard thing, I think, for guys to do. It's a hard thing to sort of expose your soft underbelly and say, I'm letting you see all of me. I know it's hard for women too, but I think women are granted the space earlier in life to do that, to express their emotions. And boys aren't in the same way. And ultimately, the answer to that question is, what do you think will make you happy when you grow up? In the end, it's going to be love for everybody. It'll express itself a million different ways, but in the end, that's what it's going to be. That's why this simple secret to manhood and humanhood is love. I mean, we all know it, but it's worth reminding ourselves from time to time, and it's valuable and necessary to teach boys that, and to give boys that space to love and to be loved.
Yeah, yes, I totally feel that. And I think you're right. Meredith, do you have any thoughts on the topic
Yeah,
of love? And
yeah. I was thinking, my daughter has a friend who's a guy who said to her maybe about a year ago, you know, you always say I love you when you get off the phone. When you're talking to people, you say I love you. I That to him was so foreign.
mm,
He wasn't used to just hearing I love you. So I think for the parents out there, and I wrote this in the Shabbat book where, I was kind of talking about like what are the parenting tools we get from that tradition of the Friday night dinner. And I said, so
mhm,
often the things we say to our kids are, tie your shoes. Did you do your homework? Come on, we're running late. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And we don't stop to say, I love you. So I think it's important that they hear it. You don't assume they know. They know we love them. Just say
mhm,
it. I also think, and it was funny. I keep playing around this idea of writing a book called How to Raise a Mensch.
mm,
And before Jules and I started working on the journal, I said to him, what did Dad and I do right? Because sometimes I feel like we just lucked out and like just happened to have these great kids. And I said, was there anything we did? And he said, Mom, you always cared about what I cared about. When he was a
mm,
little boy and he loved elephants, we went to the zoo, or he loved dinosaurs and we went to the museum and we read books about dinosaurs. And I cared. It wasn't like I was inserting myself into his life. I mean, even now, Jules is, when he graduates, he's going to commission and be a naval officer. And all of a sudden I'm
mhm,
like, oh, and he's going to be a swimmer, he's going to be on a shore. Like all of a sudden I'm learning all this like naval stuff. But I think what it was to him was that, I cared. What was important to him was important. And I found it important and I found it valuable and I found it enough that I would take the time to understand him more. And I think that's something with our kids is we care. We're there. We just show up and we're there.
yeah,
And they know that. And then I think they're going to turn out to be kids who do that for others because that will then be the norm for how you show love.
yeah, yeah. Well, we're almost out of time. So before we end, I just want to mention one more time. So Michael Ian Black's book is called A Better Man. Meredith Jacobs co-wrote a book with her son, Jules Jacobs, called Just Between Us. And you can see the link below me for the bookshop where you can purchase both of those books. And I am so honored to have had this time with you both, really, and to have been asked to moderate this meant that I was able to experience both of your books, and just really, I'm really truly grateful for that experience and to spend time with you. Thank you both for being here and for spending this evening with me. And thank you so much. Heidi's back. Hi, Heidi.
Hi. I want to thank both of you also. Thank you to my old friend Meredith and my new friend Michael Ian Black for writing such profound and moving books. And Michael, thank you also for the work that you do outside of writing this book, a lot of which involves humor and entertainment, which is important on any given day, but more important now than ever. And Meredith, thank you for the work that you do as well. Mickey, thank you for the work that you do with our families here in Metro Detroit and for building community for young families. Really, thank you for such an interesting conversation. Thank all of you at home for joining us as well. Our next event was scheduled to be a discussion with Rafi Berg, the author of Red Sea Spies, tomorrow at 11 a.m. But due to some unforeseen circumstances, that event has now been moved to Tuesday, December 8th at 2:45 p.m. Instead, our next event will be tomorrow, Friday, December 4th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when we'll be talking with Robert Alter about his recent Hebrew Bible translation and his new book, The Art of Bible Translation. We hope to see you there. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website, culturalarts.jcc.org/bookfair for our full schedule and ways to get involved. I'm certainly going to go there and click the link to buy both of these books, and I hope that you will too. Have a great night.